Thanks, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me. My name is Bryan Tolson. I'm really happy to be presenting this work to all of you online, as well as everybody in the room. It's a decent mix today. I'm going to be talking along with Dr. Ming Han, who is the lead on all of this work that I'm going to be presenting. He's a doctor now because about 3 weeks ago he passed his PhD defense. So congratulations, Ming. I do want to say, acknowledge Hongren as well. He's been an instrumental co-author on this work as well. But before I start, I wanted to give a territorial acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge that my work at the University of Waterloo takes place in the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Our main campus is situated on the Haldeman Tract, the land granted to the Six Nations that includes 6 miles on the Grand River. I acknowledge that I have to continue to work towards reconciliation through my research and community building. As such, I will endeavor to engage Indigenous communities to enhance my research and to make future versions of this Ontario Lake River routing product beneficial and accessible to these communities across the province. So I'm going to talk about the Ontario Lake River routing product today. There's a bit of a display problem in the room, but we'll manage. So I'm presenting another co-author that's not here in the room today is Bob Metcalf from the MNRF in Ontario. I'll have a couple of these QR codes throughout the presentation. So if you have a cell phone ready and you want to be able to quickly go to some of the websites I'm talking about, you can be ready to take a QR code. I'll ask my students who are in the room to maybe post some of these links in the chat as well, just to be convenient for everybody. So really this talk is for you if you say yes to any of the bullets that I've got on this slide. So first of all, if you're in Ontario and you need help discretizing your vector-based hydrological model, or if you need to know just the drainage topology, where things drain upstream and downstream of your lake, this is a talk for you. If you need a geophysical attribute of a lake, channel, or subbasin or watershed in the province, then this will also do the trick. In particular, if you're a running hydrological modeler, you're going to really want to pay attention to what we're going to talk about today. And don't fret if you're in a different province or even in a different country, I suppose, and you'd like to see a similar product in your region using locally relevant geospatial data. We'll give you some ideas about how to go about that as well. So the motivation for this research way back when, Ming was early in his PhD, was that we had watersheds that looked like this in Ontario and Canada. You have thousands and thousands of lakes, and some people want to model all of these, or many of these. But unfortunately, traditional hydrologic modeling applications don't often do that kind of, build that kind of model to explicitly simulate all these lakes. Often they ignore them all, or maybe just represent a few of the larger lakes in modeling applications and ignore the rest. But why do we need to model so many lakes? Well, first of all, lakes cover almost 10% of Canada. So that's one reason. But another really good reason is the SWAT satellite mission that's going to go up later this year is going to provide lake level measurements at incredible spatial resolution. So lakes that are, I think, on the order of 1 square kilometer, they'll be able to monitor very accurate lake levels from space every 21 days or so. So if you want to build a modeling system that moves water throughout your watershed and you need measurements most of the time to build them, well, this SWAT satellite mission is going to provide that. But we need to explicitly represent all these lakes now. So that's why we want to build models with all kinds of lakes represented. So the question is, how do we do that efficiently, and how do we put this in people's hands? So the core logic here is represented in this slide. So before I do anything else, I just want to tell you how we represent lakes in the Ontario Lake River routing product. So the lake on the panel A here represents an example vector-based sub-watershed discretization that you might delineate this watershed with when you ignore the lake. So we've just put these 2 lakes on top of panel A here, but they're not used in the discretization. So often with typical terrain processing tools, you can come up with this set of subbasins and ignore the lakes. But what we do is in panel B. So in panel B, what we do is we merge these lake shapes with the subbasin delineations in sort of an optimal way. And so what you can see here is that in panel B, this big lake is represented in a lake subbasin. And this lake subbasin is a connected lake, which means that its outflow is directly connected to a river channel and it flows downstream. Whereas this yellow subbasin is just called a non-connected lake subbasin. And all this means is that it's not explicitly connected to a river channel. And what we actually tell the routing network product is that this lake drains to this control point. And it does so in an imaginary way with essentially a 0 meter length river channel. And we do that for computational purposes because often if we had to represent these small lakes with draining channels, then we would have many more shapes, many more polygons of subbasins that we would need to have. It turns out to be not very useful. So we have these two types of lake subbasins, and you can see that every lake subbasin is defined, the outlet is defined by the lake outlet, or we call them control points. And also any lake inlet is also defined as a subbasin outlet upstream. So those are the core concepts here for our product. So prior to Ming's PhD, what I would say is that there were no vector-based or very few vector-based subbasin geospatial products like panel B. And when I say a product, when I talk about a routing product, I actually define a routing product as a set of routing networks or a set of delineated watershed routing networks over a large spatial domain. So that's what a routing product is. So I don't think these existed before Ming's work on a large scale. And one of the reasons they didn't exist is because creating networks like B for thousands of lakes is a huge terrain processing challenge. It takes a lot of computational time and it can cause things to choke. So Ming has done a lot of work to make our processing efficient and applicable over large domains and with highly resolved DEMs, for example. So the project output. So we engaged with the Ministry of, I forget the acronym every time, NDMNRF, Ministry of Natural Resources and Forests. Bob set out to support us in this project. It was about a 6-month-long project, and we wanted to develop the Ontario Lake River Routing product. So the two things that we produced in this project was the actual product itself, which is a set of GIS shapefiles covering the entire province. And then the second thing was actually linking our BasinMaker, our pre-existing BasinMaker post-processing software to the product so people could essentially customize it for their purposes. And we did that on a cloud-based platform, so nobody had to install anything to do it. So we have a website where you can access the map-based product and then also the post-processing tool as well. So first of all, I want to take you on a visit through the Ontario Lake River Routing site. So this is the main page. And if you were to click on this interactive map and click on that small shape in the middle of it there, you would be able to pull up this drop box or this menu, and the map and download rows here, these view words are actually links or hyperlinks. So you can actually click on the view link to see what this looks like. So if you were to do that, you would pull up this complicated lake and river routing network for this small subregion in the province. So let's zoom in a little bit and look a little bit more detail what this looks like. I'll catch up locally here. And so this is now what you can see if you were on the map. You can see the different colors. The yellow subbasins represent lakes that are not explicitly connected to a river channel, although they are connected to the downstream subbasin. And you can see that every lake is covered by its own subbasin, and it can be a very irregular shaped subbasin. So for example, if you go back to the previous slide, you see there's this massively long lake in this region, and that's all one subbasin. And the lake is essentially an HRU or a subunit of those subbasins. So if you were to click on a subbasin now, because it's an interactive map, you can pull up the properties or the attributes associated with each shape. So you can click on the subbasin shape, you can click on the river channels, you can click on the lakes. You can also click on these points here. If you look beside the lake, there's a point on the screen that's called a point of interest, and you get all the properties associated with it. So you can see for this particular subbasin, you could figure out the drainage area, the average aspect of that shape, the slope of the basin. Now these negative numbers indicate that there's no river channel in this headwater subbasin, and so that's why we don't have values for river slope and river length. But this also tells you the topology, where things drain. So this is gives the subbasin ID, it's a unique number, and it drains to this unique downstream subbasin ID. And there's many more, you can see there's many more attributes you can find for each of these shapes. So this is how you sort of navigate and find attributes for a specific lake of yours if you wanted to know this. So in terms of development, how do we build this product? We use the Ontario Integrated Hydrology data set. So this is basically the most advanced, best geospatial data set, I would say, covering the whole province. It's a preconditioned DEM at 30-meter resolution. We actually delineated using the enhanced flow direction data set the province has built. So the geospatial specialists in the province essentially went through the 30 by 30 meter flow direction grids and corrected them as best they could for the known drainage patterns in the basin. So we wanted to use that data. We also used hydrolakes. So these are lake polygons and lake characteristics. Other impact data that we needed was MODIS land cover type, as well as a global channel ventral width and depth data set. And importantly, points of interest. A point of interest is somewhere where you want a subbasin location, a subbasin outlet located. So for example, a flow gauge. Most people want to make predictions with models at flow gauges. So if you put in a map with points of interest showing all the gauge locations, then we can build a network including them. So we plug all that data into BasinMaker. That's a submitted paper now. It's in its third version of the software, so it's pretty well behaved, we think. And there's a link there for you to download if you want. Once we ran this through BasinMaker, we got an initial version of lake and river routing product. That's called version 0.05. We needed to then manually correct point of interest locations. So what does that mean? It means that we were essentially, because we're delineating a river network from a DEM or a flow direction grid, sometimes those artificial channels in GIS don't line up with where the actual gauges are. They can be a couple hundred meters apart from one another. And so there's some manual correction that we have to do to map and move essentially gauge locations to the Ontario Lake River Routing Network that's delineated. So we tried to do that as best we can, and that was a process that Hong Ren led and did a lot of, and so did Ming. So that was what kept Hong Ren busy for much of this project. We put the results back into BasinMaker and then got our product at version 1.0. So I just want to say a couple of words about BasinMaker because it was really the only reason we could do this project. We could only build the Ontario Lake and River Routing product because we had BasinMaker as a toolbox to do it. So BasinMaker, you can see it's a complicated set of various GIS toolbox functions. You run through it stepwise to delineate a network. But the main thing is the people contributing. So James Craig was a key contributor, and Simon's here I see, and Andita, Julie Mai, and Fraser Awal. It's a software toolbox that's written in Python. In delineation mode, it relies on both QGIS and GraphGIS environments. But the key point here that I want people to realize is that BasinMaker can delineate a routing network from whatever you want, from whatever DEM you want, or whatever flow direction grid you want, from whatever set of lake polygons you want, and from whatever points of interest you want. So it's completely customizable. Back to the Ontario Lake and River Routing product. This is what it looks like on a map. These are all the drainage regions that the province has delineated and the ministry uses. And so we kept consistent with that in our product development. And ultimately, the routing product has essentially 200,000 subbasins covering the province, an average area of 5 square kilometers. There's 82,000 lakes explicitly represented in the drainage network. from tiny lakes to quite large lakes. We also have lots of points of interest. Again, points of interest are defining where people wanted to see a subbasin outlet located. So we had almost 1,000 HydroATLAS gauges successfully integrated into the product, 437 active provincial water quality monitoring stations as well define subbasin outlets. And we have all of the provinces sort of quaternary Ontario watershed boundary outlets included as well, because those are the key sort of traditional units or watershed units the province uses. So we wanted to be able to include them explicitly in this product as well. Ultimately, we had a list of about 4,000 points of interest that we wanted to include in the product. We could only include about 94% of them, which we thought was a very high number anyways, because there was, as I said, there's sometimes gauges that didn't quite line up with the river network, and we couldn't figure out why, and we just had to leave them out. So there was a couple of regions. There's also a couple of points of interest that would fall in the middle of a lake, and then we couldn't figure out where on the inlet or outlet points of that lake that point of interest should lie. So we had to drop some of the points of interest for that reason as well. Now we have attributes associated with each of the shapes and data points in the routing product. So for example, we have subbasin level attributes. This includes channel length and channel slope, as well as average slope. And we have these properties as well for the entire drainage area upstream of every single subbasin. We also have topology variables. So this is just basically how things are connected in the network, what's downstream, where do things flow. For each of the lakes, we have an area, depth, and volume estimate. Those are taken from the HydroLakes database. We have a lake ID as well. For the channels, we have channel characteristics like bankful width and depth, as well as the Manning's-N coefficient for the roughness of each channel. And those are important for hydrological routing purposes. So if you want to move water through a network in a hydrological model, you need all of these characteristics to do that routing. And then we have points of interest data. So for example, where did the point of interest come from? Was it a water quality monitoring gauge, HydroATLAS, or was it a quaternary watershed outlet? You can look up the attribute table that's on our website, but they all look something like this. We clearly define each variable and give it a unit and everything else, so you can figure out what's in the shape files. Here's what an example attribute would look like on a map. So this is the bankful width of the default that we would estimate. That's not ground truth, by the way. This is from a global bankful width and depth database, and so none of this is ground truth. It's an initial estimate to get you moving on your model. It gives you a sense of the kind of spatial detail that you have. And then we also list out the 3,500 points of interest that are actually included in the routing product itself. So you can look up to see what gauge is there and all of the lat long information associated with those points of interest. Now I wanted to compare this routing product with something that maybe some of you are familiar with. How many people have ever looked at watersheds or HydroATLAS? One person has. Well, a co-author has. So that's good. I'm sure there's people out there in the digital audience that have tried to utilize hydrosheds before. So I wanted to compare how our product is different from what I consider to be sort of a state-of-the-art, very common watershed delineation product. It's a global product. The first thing is that it's 500 meters. Okay. HydroATLAS and HydroLakes, it's all the same. It's all derived from the same thing. So whatever you call it, it comes from a 500 meter resolution DEM, whereas our product is from a 30 meter DEM. The global lake characteristics database has been published in Scientific Data of Nature. It was just published this year, but essentially this diagram shows us the relationship between what is very new, covering the globe, called HydroATLAS, and it has Lake Atlas. It shows you how it's related to HydroLakes. But the key is that all of these subbasins and discretization are derived from the same hydrosheds information. So I want to show you how they delineate routing networks compared to us. HydroATLAS is available at a number of different levels. And so if you look at the level 8 data set, For HydroATLAS on the left, we have panel A. This is what the watershed delineation would look like for this outlet. This is it actually doesn't sub-discretize this watershed at all. These lakes are just overlaid on top of it to show what it looks like with respect to the lakes. But then they have a second product, which is called HydroATLAS Level 8 with lakes. And with lakes, they try to integrate subbasins and lakes together in the product. And you can see what happens here for these two lakes. There's A1 and A2. They actually drain to A3, subbasin A3, and then A3 drains to A4, and then A4 drains to the outlet. So that's what's happening with these lakes. One thing you can see is that the inflows for lakes A1 and A2 are not apparent from this discretization. Each of these lakes has a local subwatershed that should drain directly into it, and they don't show up on this topology. So that's a shortcoming. Now, if we compare things to what I just showed you, so this is HydroATLAS Level 8 on HydroATLAS Level 8 with lakes on the left, and then this is what we would discretize using our Ontario Lake and River Routing product. I have a star here because I've simplified it. We post-processed it with BasinMaker to make it similar in size. And what you can see is that we have these lakes within a subbasin, so we have a local drainage area draining to each of those lakes, and the yellow lake drains to the blue lake. And that's the drainage pattern in our Ontario Lake and River Routing product. Now, if you compare both sides of this, both panels here, you can see that there's a problem in HydroATLAS. Lake A2 drains to A3 and skips draining to A1. So this relationship between the lake's drainage pattern is not shown in the HydroATLAS dataset. Now we could go to a more highly resolved layer of HydroATLAS subbasins with lakes, and that's shown on the left. And if you follow through the drainage directions, you can see where things move in the subbasin. And in particular, if you then compare it to our comparable Ontario Lake and River Routing product delineation, again, you see that this upstream lake here in yellow, it drains into this lake, but that doesn't happen over in the HydroLakes topology. So there's another problem with HydroLakes there. And so in summary, there's just sort of hydrological consistency issues in the HydroATLAS data set. So in terms of just summarizing the differences between our product and HydroATLAS, as I showed you in the previous slides, HydroATLAS generates hydrologically inconsistent topologies, which is a problem if you want to move water around the watershed. There's resolution differences. Our product has a complete set of network attributes that are required for hydrologic routing simulation, whereas HydroATLAS has a few of those missing, but HydroATLAS has a number of more attributes than our product. Our product defines subbasin outlets at flow gauge locations, while HydroATLAS does not. So if you want to use hydrosheds to build a watershed model, you're going to be predicting, you're not going to have predictions of flows typically at your flow gauges, which is what you need. So that's really inconvenient. Okay, so now that I told you the difference between our product and an existing comparable product, let me tell you about how we post-process our routing network. So first of all, I have to just quickly say that we have BasinMaker, the software tool developed also to run in what we call post-processing mode. And so after you've delineated the network, BasinMaker 3.0 is implemented to be able to post-process efficiently without any terrain processing. So no DEM processing means it allows users to efficiently customize an existing routing network for their purposes. For those of you who are GIS gurus, we've got post-processing mode configured to work in multiple GIS environments. In QGIS and ArcGIS Pro, both of those require local software install, but also we've got it running on Google Colab using the GeoPandas GIS environment, which means you can all do this now without any software installed. So that's what is cool about that. So I want to talk about that. So maybe you'd like to extract only your watershed from the Ontario Lake and River routing product. Well, you can do that. You either need to know the point of interest name, the gauge name, you either need to know the lat long or a subbasin ID. If you have one of those things, you can log on to Google Colab and essentially extract the shape files for only your region of interest or only your watershed of interest. It's essentially an online Jupyter notebook. And Ming's going to show you a demo of this at the end of the talk. So maybe you'd like to simplify your watershed discretization. So again, you can use Colab to do that. It's easy. So example simplifications. Panel A here is showing the original resolution Ontario Lake and River routing product with, I think there's 300 lakes on that watershed. It's in Algonquin Park, actually. And so maybe you want to take away some of those lakes. So panel B is removing all lakes below some area threshold. So simplifying things. Maybe you want to make the subbasins larger. So you can change the drainage area threshold that we use to define subbasins. So those are all simplifications that you can do online in Colab, and then you can download the finalized routing product or routing network that applies to your basin. If you're a Raven hydrologic modeler and you want to build model input files, well, again, BasinMaker on the Colab site can do that. You basically tell it, create Raven input files, and it'll create them all, and then you can use them directly in Raven. It also produces what we have GeoJSON files. GeoJSON files allow you to use James Craig's, who's my colleague in civil engineering, RavenView website. Basically, RavenView is a picture here. You can see that in RavenView, if you were to load up the GeoJSON files that are produced by BasinMaker, you could see basic topology, upstream and downstream relationships between all the subbasins and lakes. And it's all web-based, so you don't have to install anything. And if you're a Raven user, RavenView allows you to visualize all the performance and simulation results online as well without installing anything. So that's interesting for anybody who uses Raven. Now, maybe you'd like to see this in another province or in another region. Well, there's two options. The first option is you can use, again, you can use BasinMaker on the Colab site. We also have a North American lake river routing product. This is at a less resolution. It's 90 meters based on the Merit DEM, but you can see it covers all of North America essentially, and allows you to extract the routing networks that we have already pre-built for North America. Option two, if you have a different DEM or a different flow direction grid you want to use, well, you can just use BasinMaker directly, or you could talk to Ming or I, and we could see how hard that would be. The first example application I wanted to show you was just Ming's thesis. So Ming spent a lot of time modeling the Petawawa watershed in Algonquin Park. The middle figure here shows the watershed itself. And essentially this watershed was modeled in our Raven modeling software. It was represented with something, we had something like 300 lakes explicitly simulated in this model, running it for about 5 or 6 years. And the nice thing about this case study is that Bob Metcalf from the ministry hooked us up with this data set, and it has time series of daily lake levels for 15 to 20 natural lakes. And so we were able to calibrate our model and see that we could actually predict the fluctuations in these lake levels at many resolutions, for very small lakes as well as for very large lakes. That's what all of these time series plots show, the correspondence between simulated and observed lake levels. And those are pretty good quality results. The second application that I thought I'd mention is a paper that Julie Mai just led. Hong Ren and I were co-authors on that, but it was called the Great Lakes Runoff Intercomparison Project, GRIP-GL. Essentially, we did a model intercomparison project where we compared 13 different hydrologic models across 200 and some odd basins in the Great Lakes region. But the point of this slide is just to say that what we did in this project was we pre-built lake and river routing networks that were used by 6 different modeling groups. So what's coming out of our products is usable by different models. So all these highlighted models are going to be used simulate with them. So this included a VIC model, SWAT model results, SWAT flood mesh. So it's a very usable thing that people were able to do, and it really enhanced, I think, this project. That's all for me. I'd like to thank our funding from the province of Ontario. There's a couple of publications there that we've done from this work, and of course we had support also for BasinMaker, so I thought I'd mention that on the slide as well. But that's essentially all I have. So one thing that I want to do is in the chat, if you have a favorite lake that you work on, or a favorite river, or a gauge that you model, and you want to see BasinMaker delineate that region, type it in the chat, and Ming and Hongren are going to make sure that it's small enough that we can actually do it in real time, and then Ming will do it in real time. So find that lake of interest and put it in the chat. Ming will then start that demo in about 5 minutes. But I thought I'd take maybe 5 minutes of questions before we do that. So thank you.
Any questions in the Q&A box? Or you can open up this Q&A box?
I have the Q&A box. Yep. So the question is, would it be possible to build a similar product with a lower resolution DEM, for example, 100 meters? Yes, for sure. We've built, so the routing network covering North America uses the Merit DEM, which is about 90-meter resolution. Our Ontario product uses a 30-meter DEM. The first version that we built covering Canada used a 500-meter DEM, but we don't like to, that gets hard to work with to represent small lakes. So the answer is yes. Another question is, does your model look at subsurface water movement, such as through tile drainage or storm sewer networks? So let's separate the model from the routing network itself. So the Ontario Lake and River Routing Network, the product and the North American product are just discretizations of a system. So it's just talking about how things are connected and how water moves on the surface. If you have a model that simulates tile drainage and all you need is the discretization layer, the geospatial fabric on top of that model, then you can do that. In Raven, when we model in Raven, there is no tile drainage option in Raven right now, as I can recall, and Raven is not an urban hydrologic model, so it doesn't do storm sewer networks. But again, if you were using some other model that did simulate that stuff, then you would have we would be providing you the sort of core geospatial fabric to put the model inside of, I guess. Hopefully that answers your question. Yes, when talking about lakes, do you include reservoirs as well? Yes. So the 82,000 lakes in the province, that includes lakes and reservoirs. So in hydro lakes, there's 3 different categories of water body. There's natural lake, there's a managed built reservoir, and then something in between, which is a reservoir that doesn't have a structure or something. I forget. There's 3 categories. And we retain those 3, that attribute in our database as well from hydro lakes. So whenever you would click on a lake in the product, you would see whether or not it was an actual reservoir or a natural lake immediately. Is there any questions from the audience here as we wait? Kevin.
Thanks, Brian. That's a great presentation. So my question is, applying the product to small versus large lakes or watersheds, would the product be necessarily more sensitive or more applicable, or provide more precise predictions for small lake systems versus large lake systems such as the Great Lakes?
Let me just pull up this slide here. So in terms of precision, that's a hard question because, you know, panel A is like the most detailed resolution discretization we have in the product. So we can't get any finer, but we could if we reprocess the DEM. But if you don't want to reprocess the DEM, you basically have the choice of how to simplify the panel A. So panel A has something like 400 lakes explicitly represented. You could build a model around that, simulate water levels at all 400 lakes, or you could go all the way down to like simplification C, where you represent maybe 5 or 6 lakes explicitly and simulate the water levels there. So in Ming's case, for this particular watershed, we erred on the side of modeling every single lake. And his results if you bear with me. His results, I'm trying to get all the screens here lined up, show that, for example, this lake in the bottom right corner, this is only a lake that has a drainage area of 3 square kilometers. So it's a tiny lake, but we're able to simulate the relative change in the water levels reasonably well. Whereas, you know, this is a 2,900 square kilometer drainage area for this lake, and able to simulate it also reasonably well. So in terms of being able to model small versus large lakes, I think it can do both. The limit is lakes that are 10 hectares or larger. So we don't have, in this product, we don't have lakes that are smaller than 10 hectares represented. But every lake.
So you anticipate that others
I think we're going to, well, that's going to be one of the things we try to follow up. So one of the people, there's Environment Canada co-authors on the Great Lakes study, the Great GL study, and they're interested in essentially using all these, seeing if they can use each of these models to predict net inflow to each of the lakes. And so we're going to try to help them do that. The short answer is probably it doesn't make that much of a difference, because you can see that it's almost as important what rains directly on the lake versus what rains and drains to the lake. So that's kind of unique about the Great Lakes. It's really important to know how much it's raining on them. Just so happens we don't have many precipitation gauges actually on the lake, so that's not a very good. So yeah, good question. Is there stuff in the chat?
There's one person in the chat from
Okay, so Amin is one of my former PhD students. Hello, Amin. Is it possible that drainage directions change seasonally or due to changes in water levels, and does the product handle that? No, the product doesn't handle that. The product uses the static drainage direction, a flow direction grid, but the product can, we've done it in the prairies. It can identify, if we're careful with the DEM, it can identify non-contributing areas that we simply wouldn't need to model, for example, with the model itself. But we can't, within the product itself, represent the dynamic nature of those, the size of those contributing areas. Any other questions here? As we try to see if Ming has enough time. Can you find Kinesis Lake, Ming? Okay, we're going to give you one more minute, Ming, and then you're going to come up and just do an example lake. So, any other questions from the audience? I don't see anything online. So maybe what we'll do, maybe it's best now to go and show people what we want to do with this demo is to show people that you can use the product.
Hi everyone. In the next 5 minutes, I will show you how easy it is to get your watershed from the Lake River routing product and to customize it for your own modeling purpose. So let's go into the Lake River routing product website. So in the left figure, it will transfer you to a website that shows you the routing product. And on the right, it will transfer you to the post-processing tools. So we will use left website to locate our interested watershed, and we will use the right website to extract it from the data and to customize it. So let's go into the left website first. So assume we are interested in the lake kinesis. So we type it here, lake kinesis. So this is located around here. So we can click this polygon and click view. It will show you the developed lake river routine data for that region. And we know the lake is around here. So let me disable the routine data first. And we can say this is the lake kinesis, and let's bring the data back. So assume we are interested in the watershed that include lake kinesis that related to this gauge. We're interested in the watershed upstream of this gauge. So we will get the gauge name by click the gauge. Let me click the gauge here. So this is the gauge name. Then we will go back. So this is all the information we need to extract the interest watershed. So the gauge name. And then we will go to the Google Colab. Basically, in the Google Colab, I will show you how to extract the watershed of that related to that gauge and how to simplify it using BasinMaker post-processing functions. So the first thing we need to do is to run this blog to install all the required Python libraries. And in this section, we will try to download the routine product that containing that gauge. So we will download the Ontario Lake River routine product. And this is the gauge name we are interested in. I just copy it from there, and we run this section. And it will return the subbasin ID of that gauge. And in this section, we will try to extract all the subbasins that related to this subbasin. We will give some random folder name, and we'll run this section. So this section will extract the watershed from the routine product. It finished and take only like 4 seconds. Let me show you the result. So clearly, so this is the routine product that is extracted from the lake river routine product, and you can say all lakes are correctly represented. For example, if for your modeling purpose you are not interested in these small lakes, we have a solution for you. So all we need to do is to remove them from the routine product. For example, we are not interested in lakes with a lake area smaller than 5 square kilometers. We can run this section. And let me try to plot the result. So it finished, it only take around 3 seconds. So as you can see from the result, all lakes, small lakes are removed. Only 3 big lakes are kept. And again, for example, if you say, okay, there are too many small subbasins, you want to merge them to the downstream subbasins, we can realize that too. For example, we want to remove subbasin with drainage area smaller than 20 square kilometer. We just put 20 at here and run this block. Let me try to plot the result. So it's only take around 2 seconds. So here we are. So as you can see, those 2 small subbasins are merged to the downstream subbasin. So in this video, I show you how to locate the interested watershed and how to use BasinMaker functions on Google Colab to extract the interested watershed and simplify the lake river routine product by removing lakes and simplify it by increase the basin size. We have other 2 functions in this Google Colab, for example, define HRUs and generate Raven hydrological modeling input. Let me know if you have any other questions.
So Ontario was a very active participant in this product. They were the ones that said definitely put water quality stations in as points of interest. They were the ones that said make sure you include our quaternary watershed boundary sub-basin outlets as points of interest because we want those in there. They were just a week behind. They told us to go and put in the actual hydropower facility locations in there, but it was too late for this version. I have another project with the Ontario Ministry to continue working on this. Next version will be including hydropower locations, as well as including basically different types of wetlands. We want to try to include wetlands in this kind of routing product as well. So the government, the ministry from Ontario was the only one giving us data, essentially, to do this particular project. But other people gave us funding to do related work and to help to delineate complicated watersheds. So the other groups mentioned essentially gave us the funding to have Ming do his PhD and all these other people do some work on it. Yes. So I think the parks people are, I haven't talked to people who run the park, but the ministry that is supporting us is the forecasting, the agency responsible for flow forecasting in the park. So we have conservation authorities in Ontario, which cover the south part of the province, and then the large expanse in the north generally is covered by the ministry that's supporting us in terms of flow forecasting. So they're the ones, I guess, that would be predicting water levels in the park. Yeah, well, we're allowed to disseminate it the way that we just showed today, but they're linking to all of that. So, yeah.
And one last question in the Q&A.
Yeah.
Are possible lake river regulations considered in this product?
So there's nothing explicit in this product other than labeling each water body as a regulated water body or not. So if you know it's a regulated water body, it would be then incumbent upon you as a modeler to figure out what the regulation strategy is. The tool that we use to model typically in Raven does allow you to actually represent water management activities for various water bodies, but it depends on what hydrological modeling tool or routing tool you actually use to simulate the discretized system that we produce in the product. All right, is there anything else? Doesn't look like it, so. Oh, Simon has one question.
So if somebody wanted to get started, how to use
Yes, thank you. The question is, hey, I want to use BasinMaker, the full version, as well as Colab. Where do I go to? It's in one of the QR code links in this talk, but there's a BasinMaker website, BasinMaker UW, and that has tutorials for using BasinMaker, and it'll walk you through Colab, walk you through the install process as well, because it's open source. Thank you, Simon. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a good afternoon. Happy to take questions over email.
Thank you.
Bye.